We have been duped by feminism, sexual liberation, and antidepressants. We have been told that we are powerful and free now as women, but we feel tired, wired, and bitter. We're mostly eating right, exercising and meditating, wrangling to do lists, and arranging playdates. And yet there's a haunting hollowness beneath the huge complaints. What if I told you that there is a huge storehouse, a reservoir of energy inside of you that has not been tapped, that you could feel light and pulsing, excited and alive in ways that a wellness lifestyle cannot deliver, that you could trust yourself, that the world could feel safe, and that unexpected and expected delights could start to illuminate your path. No coach, therapist, doctor, or guru required. Just you learning to get real, present, and attentive with you. I feel like I'm here to matchmake your inner parts for the greatest love affair ever written. I want to help you learn first where you're buying eggs from the hardware store, which is the source of all pain. I want to help you master entering through the upset, which is the only spiritual practice you'll ever need, and to get real comfortable putting on your villain crown, which is, in my opinion, the key to true power. And then you'll attune to your inner yes so you can live the life defined by the specific pleasure of who you are. I am so excited to announce my latest book called The Reclaimed Woman, which is available for pre-order now. So if you head to the link in show notes, you can learn more about bonuses, events, and companion offerings. And I cannot wait to see your gorgeous face on the path. I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan. You may know me as a New York Times bestselling author of a book with an exploding pill on the cover, renegade psychiatrist, pole dancer, or honorary member of the Disinformation Dozen. What can I say? I'm a born provocateur. I've spent most of my recent life exposing deceptions, connecting dots, and discovering the secret places my inner victim is still waiting to be liberated. And now I feel called to help you reclaim all of your parts, your health, your sexuality, your power, and your expression, so that you can finally truly own yourself. I want to ignite in you that inner knowing and the pulsing vitality that lives beneath your disempowerment, disconnection, and resentment, so that you can audaciously, courageously, and playfully alchemize your struggle into the specific pleasure of who you are. This is Reclamation Radio, a Soulfire production. Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan, and I am here with the notorious, no, I'm just kidding, Nicole Bendayan. And we are going to be chitty-chatting all things birth control and holistic hormone balancing. Nicole is a new friend and ally. I actually only learned about her work because of the controversy that, because of how many people sent me this Washington Post article. And we were just chatting beforehand to, resolve any potential victim stories and to say that there is always so much beauty in this kind of a smear piece because it brings so many of us who already share this worldview together. And my hope is that this conversation grows that field really of two women standing for what is possible. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So you have been crowned a misinformation agent. I am very familiar with this lovely accolade. And I actually don't want to spend a ton of our time and energy on, what's been up and whose panties are getting in a bunch about what, because my approach after, a decade and a half in the trenches is kind of like to be as unbothered and uninterested as possible, while also, continuing to tell the story of really, sounding the alarm on the untold adverse effects of pharmaceuticals and also tell the story of what is possible when we align with our female biology. And I would love for you to have the mic, because I had an experience of this kind of a bait and switch, which you'll describe with Newsweek actually early on. And interestingly, it was on the subject of my perspective on HIV AIDS of all things. And I just started to get like a little bit of a sense that it wasn't going to be what they had promised, and kind of like how could it be because of how pharma subsidized all of these outlets are, and
Mhm.
really what their intention is, which is to, I mean, this is not even a theory, is to spread propaganda rather than to, engage in journalistic reporting, obviously. So none of this comes as a surprise. And there really was a dupe, right? There really was something that you were set up for. So I'd love to just give you the mic and for, this opportunity to be to report on your side of the experience, what all went down. And then I really want to spend most of our time talking about your work and what you and I both know is possible in the realm of feminine health reclamation. So, what happened?
So I was approached by a journalist from the Washington Post back in December or really late November. And she just approached me wanting to talk about hormonal birth control and fertility. And of course, my gut was like, oh, I'm scared. Like, this could go either way. But I had a couple of conversations with her and had some emailing back and forth. And even though my gut was still like, oh, I'm scared, like she scares me, there was definitely it seemed like the intention behind the piece was positive. And I think that's where it really gets frustrating because when she approached me, she was very like basic about it. But then through our conversation, she gave me a little bit of reassurance. And then the editor for the piece calls me and wants to set up a photo shoot. And that sounds okay, cool. Like, why would someone want to set up a photo shoot if they're going to drag me through the mud? So they wanted to set up the photo shoot because the piece was supposed to come out the following week. So it was like pretty quick. And so I was like, okay, cool. So she sent somebody over. The photographer told me that she had read the first draft of the article and said that it was a positive piece. And she even used the word trailblazing, and it seemed great. And then that gave me a lot of reassurance. So I was waiting on a little bit of communication. The editor calls me again. She's like, listen, when we don't know if it's going to go to print or not, but if it does, we love to send the print to you. So let me know what your address is. If it goes to print, we'll send you a couple of copies. Great. That also gave me quite a bit of reassurance because, why are you going to drag me through the mud and then send me a print of it, even though I still want that print? But
Frame that shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then I don't hear anything for a while. The journalist messages me telling me that after an inquiry with one of the social media companies that one of my TikToks was taken down and what my response was to it. So I sent her a response saying, I stand by the TikTok. Here is the research that I presented in that video, and that I do agree with taking down TikToks that may perpetuate misinformation. But she decided to leave out the fact that my video was backed in science and just took I fully support them taking down any sort of information that may perpetuate misinformation. And
The
then
worst
I
part
haven't
about
heard.
censorship is when it comes back to bite us. That's the
Yeah,
trouble,
right.
right? With any kind of a takedown of an information. So they curated the part where you agreed with your own censorship.
Yeah,
Is- Yeah.
which I do stand by. I
Okay.
100% stand by that comment. It's the omission of the other aspects that shows how skewed it really was, and that the piece was like already either written or they decided to change it up within the month that they said that they were going to present it. And then I spoke to the photographer and she was like, listen, I can't tell you what was written in the previous piece, but this isn't it. And that was like, oh, interesting. You're also duping her. That's cool. So it's been, insane. They wrote 3 times pretty much how I'm not a medical professional and I don't claim that I'm a doctor, which I do not, but they of course left out the multitude of certifications that I have, the extensive education that I've gotten in women's health, anatomy, cycle tracking, nutrition, etc., and really just tried to drag me through the mud. But the thing is, well, there's a couple of things that are interesting here because also never once mentioned anything about politics. And then it became a political piece. And, right before it talks about me, it says something of the sort of influencers of all political stripes seeking fame and fortune, and then right after it talks about me, there's a sub headline of a right-wing conservative
Right.
push or something. And it's like, we've never talked about politics. You have no idea what my political stance is. And if we were to have talked about politics, I would have omitted myself from this article because what I do has nothing to do with politics. It's women's health. And the fact that they're politicizing women's bodies is really grotesque to me. So that's definitely not ideal. But you know what? The outpouring of love and support that I've gotten since the article has come out, the way that so much of what they said was so easy to refute that it was kind of just a joke. The article was all over the place. It didn't really have any sort of, full line going through it. It was really scattered and just poorly written. So that fact and the fact that the writing was so easy to refute gave me a lot of good content to create about how I could refute it.
Absolutely, absolutely. The political nature of it is something that I've also experienced as somebody who's been lumped, with all sorts of right wing adjacent. I've literally never made a political statement. I'm an apolitical person in my entire public career ever. And this is a strategy that I've come to understand in this arena. And this is my perspective, not necessarily one you must agree with, is that as a former, third wave feminist and somebody who has really devoted a lot of time to understanding the psychology of feminism as it exists, I have come to see that it requires, especially neoliberal feminism, requires the support of antidepressants. So let's say psychotropics in general, and also birth control to substantiate so many of the pillars of
Mhm.
feminism, which is that we must reject this, right? We must not be cyclical beings. We must not be identified with our female biology because we are mimicking, the men that I would say we're actually fundamentally still terrified of. But nonetheless, we are mimicking these men and imagining that that is empowering, right? We are disconnected from our kids. We are
Mhm.
disconnected from childbirth. We're disconnected from our cycles and menopause and all the things. And somehow we're supposed to feel fucking fantastic. And we actually are wired and tired and bitter and sick,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely.
And so it needs to be politicized because it's all part of this machinery that the
Mhm.
media has really become aligned with. And so I'd love to speak about this concept of gaslighting and medical gaslighting because the stories of everyday women. Okay, so let alone you're being a mouthpiece for these women, supporting these women, you also have been, right? That woman,
Mhm.
that is often our greatest credential is, the journey we've walked home to our own bodies. And the gaslighting experience is one that I appreciated as very real in the psychiatrist's chair, right? Because I would see all of these women who were started on NuvaRing or, prescribed Depo, Provera, or started on orthotricycline and somehow developed mania, like literally weeks later,
Mhm.
somehow developed, depression or anxiety or, the mini pill postpartum. And suddenly they're having ideation of like harming their child. Literally, I saw these
Yeah.
cases with my own eyes and I was able to connect the dots, right? So the system as it's set up is set up intentionally, non intentionally to prevent dot connecting, right? So, like, once you start connecting dots, you don't need that system any longer, right? So, everything in silos is how you have a psychiatrist and a gastroenterologist and a rheumatologist, and you have
Mm.
all your specialists who know better about your body, right? And you know women, I know women who go back to their prescriber, right? And say, I feel funky, something feels off. My hair is falling out. I have brain fog. I have joint pain. Like, I all of a sudden, like, I just don't feel like myself. And they're told, what? It's you're
In
fine.
your
It's
head?
not that. Yeah, it's in your head, right? Go see the psychiatrist, right? So I was often on the receiving end of that. And, this is where I'm sorry, no credentials are required to report on this phenomenon. So I wonder, if you could speak a little bit to your experience and also to what you see and what might be, you know, some of what you think is at stake here if women believe, when they are dismissed and told that it's all in their head, that nothing's actually wrong because the medication is safe and effective. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, I was on birth control I was on NuvaRing for about 7 years and then was on the IUD for 2 years. And it was interesting because I had all of these negative symptoms. I had intermittent bleeding. I had terrible gut issues. I was puking twice, 3 times a week. I could hardly eat anything, even though I gained 20 pounds during that time. I went to go see 4 different doctors within 3 years. Every single one of them dismissed me. I flat out asked if it had anything to do with the birth control. They said no. I guess victim blaming. I should have probably looked at the pamphlet that it came with, but because all of my symptoms are there. And, it was really disheartening. And then once I got my IUD taken out, some of the symptoms had already subsided, which I now recognize is because I went from the NuvaRing, which is an estrogen and progestin, to a progestin only. So some of the symptoms had subsided. My hair changed like crazy. It got so much curlier. There was a lot of changes. And then I got the IUD taken out. And I remember even in that last appointment, I was like, I have really bad anxiety. I don't feel good. It shouldn't be in me. And, she fully dismissed me. And throughout the kind of previous couple of years, it was always that thought of, I don't know myself without synthetic hormones, right? I've been on these since pretty much I've had a cycle since I was 16. And I don't know myself without them. I know that my hormones are doing stuff to my body. I know that they have so many different impacts. I was going through my nutrition education, so I really started to recognize the importance of hormones and the impact of them. And I was like, I don't know myself without synthetic hormones. So I decided to go off and started to do a lot of research into the birth controls that I was on and found all of my symptoms, of course. And then also started doing research into women's health. And that was the first time that I saw that there was 4 phases to my menstrual cycle. And I was stunned because here I am thinking I'm well educated, I'm really into biohacking, I'm doing nutrition certifications, and I don't even know the basics of my menstrual cycle. This is wild. So I started to continue to do more research, started to kind of put, like you're saying, putting the dots together of, okay, these hormones follow a predictable pattern and they need to be supported differently. They're impacting me differently. So why am I not living in tune with that? So I started doing that even before I found out that phase syncing or cycle syncing was a thing. And, then during COVID, ended up coming out with my practice because I had to leave my other job as a nutrition and culinary director of a startup because that was toxic. So decided to come out with this. And just the response that I got was really dumbfounding of how little everybody knew. And then as I continued with it, it was very slow growth. I had changed my personal Instagram into my business account. And so I had a couple of interactions, but it wasn't big. And then I went on TikTok and then I went viral. Within 2 or 3 weeks of going on TikTok, I'd gone viral and had gained like 400,000 followers within pretty much 72 hours. It was definitely life changing. And I was freaking out. Like, I'm an introvert. I'm not very out there much. So it was pretty difficult to kind of reconcile with that. But what I recognized was that the content that I'm creating and the messages that I have and the education that I'm able to provide is so necessary for women that I now have a responsibility to continue this work. And having that baseline has enabled me to continue this after every time that I've wanted to give up. But it really is that recognition of how important this work is because I have hundreds of women messaging me all the time, telling me about their experiences, telling me that, they went to their doctor and they've been bleeding for 40 days straight. And the doctor was like, well, I don't really know. So you can go on birth control if you want, or see what happens, you know? And all of these other things that women just aren't given informed consent. And that's really where my baseline lies. I believe in the access of birth control. I think it's essential to have access to it, but I don't think that we're given informed consent when it comes to going on birth control. And that's really where my frustration lies. And it is the gaslighting. It is the telling us that we're crazy or that, we don't know what's going on in our own bodies. And it's very upsetting. And this article has been a reflection of that gaslighting, right? You're taking my story, who I do have credentials and I have experience, and you're taking that and positioning it as misinformation, which is exactly what the medical system has been doing to women for so many years. Of no, I think I know what's going on in my body, and you're telling me I don't. So either I give up and I don't seek any more answers and I live with the idea that women are just supposed to suffer, or I go against you and I understand my own body and I tune into it and I learn to understand the communication that my body provides to me and learn how to support it, which is what I try to help women with. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm a believer in that Bucky Fuller quote, right? That says you don't fight the existing system, you build a new one that renders, it obsolete. Because if you are going to the conventional medical system for informed consent, literally, or expecting that, or if you are going there expecting some sort of, magic pill, right? Or no strings attached solution,
Mhm.
you just are going to the wrong place, right? Like it's going to the butcher and expecting a vegan lentil dish. It's not for sale there, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I really love about how you have amassed, broken through the censorship ceiling and amassed this following so quickly. I mean, it's extraordinary because I'm not sure we need to get our information any longer from, you know, the horse's mouth, right? If we can source it, if people can source it from you, for example, then they can make their own decision, right?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that we have to look at here because I think for many a years, many generations, we were told to look to the authorities to give us the right information and the ethical information. So, just like in the medical system, we've always been taught to look at our doctors like they know what they're talking about and that they've gotten the right education that promotes wellness and health care, even though that's really not what it is. It's really unfortunate when you look at the statistics of how many hours of nutritional training doctors have to
Right.
take and
One.
how many actually hit that recommended dose. So we look to them for support and that they should know the answers for us. The same way that we've always looked toward legacy media or mainstream media to be able to provide us with information that is factual, that is correct, that is verified, etc., so that we can absorb that and then navigate life through that lens. But the unfortunate thing is, we got to question, why are people now looking toward people on Instagram or on TikTok to get our information? It's because we don't have the trust in those people that we had perceived authority because they have kind of taken advantage of that. They've taken advantage of our trust in them. And instead of living up to the responsibility that they have, they've instead used it to manipulate and gaslight us.
Yeah. Or, it's not broken, it was designed that way, kind of a
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And collectively, I like to think metaphysically, like we are in this maturational moment where we are going from our childlike victim consciousness, like into a more sovereign relationship to ourselves. And of course, that requires a relationship to personal responsibility and choices, right? So, there are two reasons that I can think of why someone would ever even think about taking birth control, even if they knew, maybe there were some challenges with it. One is for contraception, and the other is because they have literally any diagnosis related to their hormones. Endometriosis, PCOS, PMS, just cycle irregular. I mean,
Acne.
huge laundry list. And I want people to leave this conversation with a reframe
Mhm.
around why they might consider like the less convenient path. Because, I borrow a term from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which is the poor bargain, right? This idea that we can trade our cyclical nature, our hormones, literally, for some sort of exit hatch, right?
Mhm.
From our struggle is the poor bargain we make. It's selling our soul to the devil. And it should necessarily come with consequences that remind us, that like stir us awake so that we consider walking ourselves home to ourselves, right? And I would love to start with, what you see as being, because you do have this training, you host something called Sync Society. I'm an alliteration girly. I love that. And you know that these symptoms, whatever they might be, are invitations, right? They're
Yeah,
messages from the
absolutely.
body, from you to you about you, I like to say. So, what do you think would be the reasons that somebody would even consider walking this like more complicated, right? On some level path when they could just potentially like, take the edge off their symptoms with this magic pill that even if they know there's some potential problems with it? Like, why
Well,
would they bother working with you versus like just putting the ring in, you know?
I think that it is like an instant gratification kind of situation. Of course, when you go on the pill or go on a different type of birth control or whatever it is, it's instant gratification. So the symptoms that you wanted to treat have been treated quickly. Then you have all the other symptoms that then come along with it. But because I think for the long term, there's a lot of long term impacts that we experience on the pill that most women will experience on the pill. Of course, not all. Some people love the pill and like good on them. But I think that when you come back into yourself and understand how your body works, the language of your body, how to support it during the different phases of your life and during the different phases of your cycle, you have a different level of empowerment that you can really live within that really changes your life. Because when, as cyclical beings, when we follow the predictable pattern of our hormones and understand them, then we're able to actually acknowledge the benefits of each of the phases. Because I think there's been a lot of mainstream media or whatever it is of 2 weeks of my cycle are going to suck. And then I'm going to have a good, decent 2 weeks,
Right.
right? But in actuality, if you know how your cycle works and you know how to support it, and you know how to leverage each phase for its benefits, then you can overall increase your productivity, your health, your fitness results, all of these different aspects of your life. And I think not only that, when I bring women into my programs, I always say that it goes against anything that a business coach would ever tell me, but I never want you to have to work with me again. I
Yes.
want to be able to provide you with the resources, the wisdom, the knowledge to be able to help yourself now and in any circumstance that you bring that comes about, because of course life happens and things are going to happen that your health will likely fluctuate, etc. But if you know how to come back into yourself and acknowledge yourself and know how to support it, then you're able to help yourself in the future.
Right.
And then there's the whole aspect of what legacy do we want to leave? Do we want to leave the legacy of women having to continuously go through this cycle that, they were on birth control since the age of like 12 to 16 until they were 28, and then they had to go off of birth control because they had all of these symptoms, and then they had to figure it out. And then they do the same thing with their children and their children. Like for me, the knowledge that I give, I want this to become common knowledge. Like, of course, I run a business and I have to be able to sustain my life in order to help as many people as possible. But in the actuality, I hope that my legacy is that this becomes common knowledge and women no longer have to suffer and think that suffering is just part of being a woman, right? So it's like, what do we also want to bring our children up with? What do we want to bring our daughters up with? What do we want to bring our sons up with? Because also there's been studies done that talking about periods and talking about cycles can actually foster solidarity between genders and between groups of people. So I think that the broader picture, yeah, it's a lot easier to just go on a pill and then hope that you're going to feel okay. But in the broader aspect of things, if you're actually able to support yourself, you're not only able to support yourself, but because you're able to do that and have confidence and stability in yourself, that also expands to the people around you and then hopefully for generations to come.
I love that you're framing it this way. It's so resonant because I know that our health struggles can be a portal to something so much more profound than simply the remission of symptoms, let alone just management of symptoms, which is all that, pharmaceuticals offer. I mean, I published a case report of the most severe PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder I had ever encountered. I mean, it was like it involved psychosis. It was really horrific. Within 2 cycles, this woman had total remission of her symptoms and now is like this huge light in the world. I mean, she's like an
Amazing.
extraordinary change maker. And I know that that portal, which almost squeezed her to her nihilistic end because she was, experiencing suicidality and all
Really
the rest,
scary. Yeah.
ended up being, that birth canal. And I also love the framing of this as like an intergenerational like stewardship because, I know when my daughter, I was on birth control for 12 years. I even continuous cycled. So I didn't even have like a placebo bleed. 12 years I took birth control. I never knew my cycle ever. And my daughter my eldest, when she started her entered menarche, we had like, what I called like a first moon ceremony. So we had like, I gathered all my girlfriends and we had this like beautiful, actually, have a article giving instructions, on how to do one because I was literally fucking sobbing the entire time. I couldn't even contain myself. Like it was clearly for me, and my line to regard this not as like, oh my God, now I have my period to deal with, but as this incredible initiation into the realm of woman and how profound that is, right? To orient towards your body in this way. So, thank you. So, how do we access our deepest truth? I want to share something that has really supported me in this long and twisted, wild journey that I come back to time and time again to tap into my inner wisdom, alignment, and knowing. The Divine Truth Elixir from Lotus Way helps you to illuminate your greatest purpose through the art of self healing. So you use it to unveil your sacred offering and to clarify your expression. You attract community and you magnify your powerful presence. So this flower essence dissolves the difficulty in telling and speaking your truth, this sense of lack of purpose, withdrawal patterns, inauthenticity, veiled intention, secrecy, and wanting to run or abandon ship when things get hard. So imagine tapping into your deepest truth with ease. What a gift. Head to lotusway.com and use the code Kelly15 for 15% off. The link is in show notes for you. I would love to talk a little bit about like your perspectives, which I'm sure I'll share on this like cyclical nature, right? So you say on your website that you think of a woman's cycle as her fifth vital sign, right? So this reframing of the cycle as part of your feedback, right? As far as your balance goes and inner, harmony is essential. And I wonder if you can depict like what you feel like are some of the most, I know that your background is in nutrition, what you feel are some of the most important ways to support that, right? Because there's supporting it so that we are symptom free because there's no alarms to sound. But then there's also, I don't want to use like biohacking because it's just such a masculine frame, but then there's how about optimizing, right? Then there's also optimizing, right? And I will do this as well. Like I know for whatever reason, actually like the day or so before I bleed, which is literally right now, my channel feels very open, right? And so, that's a time when the veil can be thin, right? And you can sometimes be super irritable and sometimes like be sensitive to what actually is potentially not in optimal alignment. And it also is when like I can talk to you and teach, from my heart in a way that is powerful. And the moment I start bleeding, like you will not see me on this computer. Right? So knowing that has helped me to literally schedule differently. Right. So I'd love to sort of talk about those two buckets. Like, how do you support the physiology? And then how do you optimize, like even you personally, let alone like what, you teach?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing because I am such a nerd for science. I love nutrition and science and anatomy. And then I'm also always been a very spiritual person. So I try to blend both of them in a lot of different aspects. But it's really cool because science naturally blends with spirituality because we have these different things going on in our body that enable us to do different things. So, one thing that I absolutely love is that during a menstrual cycle, you pretty much have four different perspectives that you can view life through. And when you know that, and when you can tap into each of these different perspectives that you have, you're then able to analyze the different things in your life through all of those different lenses and take a blend of that and make sure that you're actually like, it's a whole. You know what I mean? And that I think is something that is specific to women because we have our cycles that impact our brains and impact our vision, our hearing, our sense, like our sense of smell and taste. So it's really cool when we're able to tap into all of those different things and put intentional viewership on these different aspects that we want to have different perspectives on. And when we support our cycles naturally and use nutrition. So, for instance, during the menstrual phase, you're losing quite a bit of nutrients through your bleed. So, you have to incorporate more iron, and that can be really helpful to mitigate a lot of the fatigue that you might experience or the muscle weakness, etc. And then during your follicular phase, so the second phase in your cycle, when estrogen starts to rise, this is a great time to start incorporating foods that have estrogen regulating properties so that you don't experience a lot of PMS symptoms later on. And then during in and around ovulation, it's a great time to really support the liver because your liver is the one that's processing out all this excess estrogen. And if it's not working properly, then again, you're going to experience a lot of symptoms later on. And then your luteal phase, the same. You really want to support progesterone through certain foods. And you can also navigate this through a relationship perspective or a career perspective, because at different times in your cycle, you may be more focused or have better memory or verbal fluency or whatever it is that actually has these impacts on our brain changes that enable you to have more productivity long term. And if you understand how these things are affecting you, then you're able to communicate that as well and feel sturdy and confident in your communication with yourself. And I think that is a really big thing for women because, there's a lot of research with ADHD and how ADHD symptoms present differently in women because, men or boys usually go outward with their symptoms, but women tend to go inward. So we get misdiagnosed with anxiety a lot more because we have these anxious tendencies that we want to do better. We want to people please. We want to do all of these things. And we don't recognize why we might be feeling that way. And then when we're able to really understand ourselves, we have such a different level of confidence and assurance in ourselves that I think is really unmatched. And, something that I always say, women have about 451 menstrual cycles through their life, spanning 38.5 years. And it is constantly happening. Your cycle is impacting you every single day of your reproductive life, not just when you have your period or during PMS. So, to view the menstrual cycle or your period through a negative lens, imagine how large of a part of yourself you are viewing through a negative lens and how much internalized anxieties and self-esteem issues that can cause because you don't know. I always used to want to control myself. I always used to complain that why can't I just be stable? Why can't I just be consistent? And what I recognized was because my cycle changes, my consistency levels also change. And if I can go with those fluctuations, then over the span of a full cycle or 3 cycles, I end up having a lot higher productivity than if I was just trying to push through and end up burning out so much quicker.
Right. That's feminine productivity, right? So what
Mhm.
you were aspiring to is this masculine model. It's
Yeah,
energetically,
exactly.
spiritually, emotionally, right? That linearity is the collapse of female biology into, right, this waveform that was never meant for
Mhm.
us. And so it's so powerful what you just said that I want to like neon sign that because when we respond, align with ourselves in this way, the yield is nonlinear. It's exponential, right? What can arise. It reminds me of when I like started going to bed early. So I go to bed at like 9. When I started going to bed early years ago, and I thought, oh, I'm going to lose all of these productive hours after my kids go to sleep. And how's that going to work? And when I started to do that, I don't know, I wrote a couple books and created a program. Like literally, like my productivity was off the charts. How do you explain that? Right. Because I responded to my biological needs and my channel was opened. Right. So I love that. Do you literally like obviously you eat differently, which is, your expertise. And I imagine you also like exercise differently, you also socialize differently and work differently. So I'd love to get sort of like a snapshot into how you work with those phases in these different, behavioral arenas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we'll start off with fitness and stuff because when we're looking at fitness, a huge part of it is just connecting to your body and understanding and listening to your body when you need a little bit of extra time off, when you can go a little bit harder. But there also is physiological changes in the body that impact your fitness. So, for instance, when you are in your luteal phase, progesterone is higher. So progesterone has a thermogenic effect. It also increases your heart rate slightly. So during that time, it might be a little bit harder to perform a lot of high intensity exercises because the likelihood is that you're going to get fatigued a little bit faster. So keep that more so for your follicular and ovulatory phases. The same with ovulation. During right before ovulation is when estrogen really hits its peak, and this can really impact your joints and ligaments, making them a little bit more pliable. So, research has shown that women could have an 80% higher risk of injury in and around ovulation because of the effects of estrogen. And when we're able to tune into this and we know when we're supposed to work out a little bit harder or what the best workouts are to do, then we're really able to support our bodies, reduce injury, improve our fitness goals, not mess with our hormones too. This is a really big thing that exercise is necessary for health, vitality, your hormones, etc. But over exercising for women can be really, really detrimental for our hormones because it increases our cortisol response that can then take away from our sex hormones and mess with the cycle. It can mess with the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that can really impact our cycle as well. So we want to work with the different phases so that we can actually support our hormones rather than going against them. So, during menstruation, hormones are at their lowest. You're likely feeling really tired. If you don't feel like working out, you don't have to do a heavy workout, right? That's a good time to do more restorative workouts. Yes, movement can really help with pain and cramps. So I would definitely recommend some sort of movement, but that could be yoga or stretching or just going for a walk and feeling okay with going for a walk. Because that I think is also a huge thing is giving ourselves grace because a lot of the time when we've been in this male dominant society for so long that we should just be pushing through and working out and grind, but for us that will do the opposite and that will end up messing with our hormones that could then cause us to have more weight retention or water retention or impact our cortisol levels or our insulin levels and have these cascading impacts that end up doing exactly the opposite of what you want them to do.
Yeah, I always say it's how you can perpetuate exactly what you're seeking to resolve. And that is the psychology
Mm.
of the allopathic model. It's like, when you take this really self betraying path, I mean, in the end, it doesn't feel like that in the moment, but you perpetuate exactly what you're intending to resolve and complicate it, right? Because it's like a whack a
Mhm.
mole phenomenon where things pop out in new places that they weren't even emerging before.
And it's really upsetting because I have a lot of women come to me specifically with PCOS, let's say, right? Polycystic ovary syndrome. And they really struggle to lose weight because they have PCOS. And they'll go to the doctor, and the doctor will say, yeah, you have PCOS. If you want to lose weight, work out more, eat less, and you'll probably lose weight, and then your symptoms will go away. But the issue with that is that working out, over exercising, under nutrition will wreak havoc on PCOS and end up making you not able to lose weight. So then not only are you starving yourself, exhausting yourself, but emotionally exhausting because it's like, it's not just willpower, right? It's not just, oh, I have to go even harder and then I'll be better. It's actually the opposite. And it's bringing yourselves down and calming down a little bit because half of the time, the stress of I need to, lose weight quickly. I need to do this. I need to do that. That stress response, which we have to recognize that stress is a physiological response in the body, ends up wreaking so much more havoc. So when we're able to actually give ourselves grace and be like, okay, we're working on this long term. We're doing what we need to do. We're educating ourselves on how our body works. We're educating ourselves on proper nutrition and how to regulate our hormones, then we're able to actually address it. It's that whole thing of you overestimate what you can do in a week, but underestimate what you can do in a year. So I think that's really important for women too, who have been, trained by this hustle culture and immediate results to recognize this is a long-term thing. We have 38.5 years of reproductive health that we need to address. So if you start now, you can take those small steps and continue to stack upon them so that in, a year from now, in 2 years from now, you end up really connected to your body and know exactly how to regulate yourself.
Yeah. And like we've been saying, it's beyond self intimacy. It's also really unlocking some of these feminine superpowers, right? Of intuition and, what I like to call like walking in the dark, right? This capacity
Mhm.
that we have to move in ways that are inexplicably informed by a kind of deep wisdom, that we can source literally from our own bodies. And if you don't know how to read your body, right, because you're medicated or you're just living in a way, lifestyle wise, that is incompatible with your physiology, there's just so much, the sort of signal to noise ratio is such that
Mhm.
how could you possibly hear? At least
Exactly.
that's what it was for me. Yeah.
And often misinformed because when we were looking at health and wellness and all of these different studies, so many of these studies have been done on men and postmenopausal women because our hormones are make such an impact that it's difficult to include them in research studies because it costs more money and there's so many more variabilities. So we're just dismissed from these studies and then it's accepted that they apply to us when they actually don't. So we have these, fasting is so good for you. Keto is so good for you. Yeah, it's good for men and postmenopausal women who don't have a reproductive cycle, but for us, it's a little bit different.
Yes. Totally agree. Totally agree. So I'd love to talk about the other indication for synthetic hormonal medications, which is contraception, right? So part of this poor bargain is also that we can just shut that shit down until it works for us, to consider conceiving. And I have certainly developed different perspective than I ever thought I would about hookup culture and the entitlement that women have to be able to fuck as men do, and that that's something that we're supposed to enjoy and relish as part of our hedonistic, reclamation here. I don't believe that. And I am also aware that establishing effective contraception, even if it's with your own husband and you're done having kids and whatever the situation is not something that we learn. I mean, I literally didn't learn about this in medical school. I didn't learn about it from my mom. This is not something that we are discussing. And I think most of the time there is this notion that it's like condoms or birth control. And I know that isn't what you're out there talking about. However, I imagine you have a perspective because the opportunity that we have to learn our cycles involves like learning about our fertility windows, the 6 days, and being able to identify the signs. So I wonder what you think about contraceptive alternatives, if you think, if you're like a femtech girly, or if there's other approaches that you have found to be useful or something that you would endorse, and for what kind of woman, right? Because I'm even thinking like about my daughters, like, am I really going to teach them the Billings method, like in their late teen years, or is there's something else that I would like advocate for? Obviously, not including, any kind of hormonal birth control. So I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, so I actually teach symptothermal method of fertility awareness. So the symptothermal method is the only kind of fertility awareness method that I would recommend for avoiding pregnancy naturally purposes because it is the most effective. And when used properly, it's 99.6% effective, but it is 98 to 99% effective with typical use if you learn it the correct way. So that is what I teach. And it's shocking to me because there's so much backlash when it comes to fertility awareness methods. And there's so much, not even misinformation, just misguided information because, it was written in the article as well of how natural birth control is less effective. But that's grouping together all of the different types of fertility awareness, right? You mentioned the Billings method, the rhythm method, calendar method, standard days method. Those aren't nearly as effective because the Billings method a little bit more, but you're not looking at the physical biomarkers that your body is giving you in response to these fluctuating hormones. So, the symptothermal method is a method of fertility awareness in which you track your cervical mucus, your basal body temperature, which are the primary biomarkers, as well as your cervical position and LH testing for kind of more reassurance. And it is super effective, not just in avoiding pregnancy naturally, but also in improving your chances of conception because you know exactly when you're most fertile. And it gives you so much information about your overall and your hormonal health. So earlier you mentioned how I've said that, the cycle is your fifth vital sign because of all of the really important information that it can provide for you. And when you're tracking these biomarkers, you have a mapped out version of your hormones pretty much I use paper charts. I also use an app that will tell you exactly what your hormones are doing, or not exactly, but be a reflection of what your hormones are doing. And when you use this method, you can identify the onset, peak, and end of your fertility and actually confirm once ovulation has taken place because the egg only survives for about 12 to 24 hours after ovulation takes place. And then for the rest of your cycle, you have available for intercourse whenever you pretty much want. And when you're able to use the symptothermal method effectively, you have so much authority over your fertility journey. And I think that that is so important to acknowledge and is really the thing that we should be taught in schools because, I've been teaching for, I think, about 2 years now, fertility awareness, or just under 2 years, and have been using the method myself for almost 3 years. I've never had a pregnancy scare. And I've gotten quite a bit of backlash when I talk about it, saying that you shouldn't be promoting this to teenagers because they're irresponsible. And it's like, why are we, first of all, diminishing teenagers? Second of all, if a teenager is too irresponsible to track their cycle, you don't think they're too
Right.
irresponsible to take a pill every day? You know what I mean?
Or perhaps to be having sex.
Or to be
Dare
having,
I
yeah,
say?
that's something, So yeah, this I definitely think is something that needs to become more mainstream. Obviously, this article is a reflection of how they're trying to suppress that because that does take away from the reliance on hormonal birth control. And it doesn't allow them to kind of have control over our fertility because if we know, which I was never taught that there was only 6 days of my cycle that I could get pregnant. And I was never taught that there was a method to understand when those 6 days were. And, using the symptothermal method, there are a couple of days on either side because we do have to act with caution if we're trying to use this to avoid pregnancy, it's just so that we can be really confident. But if we're able to do that, we have so much more control and authority over our fertility and our health. And when we understand that, like in I call it the Fundamentals of Fam workshop series, I talk about, how you can use this method, not just for avoiding pregnancy naturally, increasing chances, but also with health. And, during ovulation is usually when women are the friskiest and we want to have sex more and we want to explore. But with the fertility awareness method, specifically the symptothermal method, we should be abstaining from unprotected genital contact during that time because pregnancy is possible. But I provide my students with 5 pages worth of alternative intimacy practices that actually are able to improve your sexual encounters and to kind of open up your sexual development because we're taking away the goal orient of penetration and climax. And I think that's really important for women as well, because we've been conditioned to understand sex as goal oriented of penetration and climax. But when we take that away, then we're actually able to discover what we like and to laugh and to explore and to try new things that can really, really build intimacy, not only with yourself, but with your partner as well. So I think that's exciting.
I absolutely love that reframe. And that's all it takes, right? Is this kind of a reframe? My BDSM teacher, Amrapani, would say, and has said that
So more.
genital, yes, because everybody needs one of those, that genital intercourse is the most boring sensation you can cultivate, which, through a lens is true. I mean, if you've encountered Jaya's erotic blueprints, you know that there is like so much that we can discover through just basic sensation play and body mapping with our partner and let alone ourselves. And I just absolutely love that reframe. It strikes me too, like, when as a mom of teen girls, I had to like jailbreak myself of a lot of basic bitch parenting conditioning around like, what if my daughter has sex, right? 'Cause she's had this like amazing boyfriend for over a year. And I've been, talking about sacred anatomy and all this stuff for years. But when I got to that place, I was like, I'm not supposed to set the conditions, for that to happen. I was like, "Why? Like, why?" Either I trust that I have, passed the torch to this woman, this young woman who knows herself, knows what's right for herself, or I'm gonna create that taboo energy. And
Mhm.
why would I do it? And that's where this programming around
Totally.
sex and pregnancy comes in. Oh, because you might get pregnant, as if that's all that sex is about. Like, can we please evolve the conversation generationally so that we can, first of all, make sure that coupled with the let's talk about sex now. I mean, I had my daughter do, I don't know if you've heard of Kim Anami, but she has a program called Vaginal Kung Fu. So I had her do this program
So
to
good.
learn about her own, anatomy and sensations, et cetera. I should probably have her have a call with you too. And, the idea is that it's an opportunity for her to deeply align with herself for herself and to make decisions that are right for herself. And I actually find that
Mhm.
this generation, they're like way more equipped to self advocate than I certainly ever was. And most of the women in my generation ever were. And so, with this kind of a reframe where it's like, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of. You have the information and tools that you need. You can trust your body. You can trust your intuition. And your intimate erotic life can include so much more than just this masculinized orgasmic arc, right? Like,
Totally.
there's
And I
so
think
much opportunity here.
that then reflects on the generation of boys and men that we're creating because, it's unfortunate that, to speak for myself, like I allowed a lot of encounters to be really disappointing and I never said anything. And I let those guys continue on doing that exact same thing, being selfish and only caring about their pleasure because they also don't understand women's pleasure. And like, unless someone teaches that to them, they're not able to understand that. So if we enable and empower younger people to feel really secure in themselves and be able to advocate for themselves and communicate what they like and how they like it and where they like it and all of these different things, then that also helps the whole generation experience sex better and not necessarily as a taboo or goal oriented thing or again a male dominant thing of male pleasure first and foremost. So I think that that is incredible. And I used to always fear having daughters when I was younger because I grew up with a sister and both of us had a lot of hormonal issues. But now it's like I'm so sad that I used to think that because now I'm so excited and I really pray that I have daughters because I'm able to then teach them these things that I never knew and that will be able to make them feel secure in themselves, allow them to be connected to their feminine energy, allow them to be beacons of light and femininity and all of these different aspects that I think are beautiful and needed in the world. And we all have our places that we need to find. And we all have our places that, some people like having more dominant or masculine energy. Not that I want to say that dominance and masculine go hand in hand, but that we do have these different levels of energy that we want to present and that we want to hold within ourselves. And I think being able to understand all of that vibrant spectrum of energies allows us to then hold that and project that into the world.
I love that. It's such an opportunity to reclaim ourselves as women from the internalized misogyny that we now carry. And
Mhm.
as you can see
Absolutely.
from the women, who played the antagonistic role in this, recent piece, which has been my experience. Like my
Mm.
biggest haters have always been women, always to a person. I can't even think of a time that I have been maligned by men. And I get it. I get it because projection is real. And whatever it is that we are not ready to own in ourselves, the tension of opposites within, like we have to play with outside. And we are the purveyors of our own oppression at this point. So, to take this opportunity to heal from that, is so powerful. And it feels really good to stand with you as an ally. And I'm here, I'm in your corner. However, I can support you including with my very important credentials, whatever it is that they feel they want, but that's not actually what they want because they don't want to listen to me either, trust me.
No,
And I'm just really excited that you're out there doing this work. And yeah, happy to
thank you.
play in this arena with you. Thank you so much, Nicole. We'll make sure that in show notes are all the ways to get support from you and your offerings. And you have amazing presence on TikTok and Instagram. And so far have a clear open mic. So I hope that that continues. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been really great to connect with you as well.